number 150. Oh, my notes are wrong. Number 150. Oh, geez. Number 152. My notes say 151. I know that's not true. Recorded live Monday, April 1st. I know that part's right. 2013. I am the SharePoint Fool and your host, Todd Klindt. And as you can tell, I'm filming from on location tonight. Let me check all my stuff and make sure I actually am recording on location. Yeah, we're still going here. From beautiful Bellevue, Washington, little town up here in the Pacific Northwest. Nice little town. Good people, good things going on up here. And so I'm doing this one on site, sort of, in my hotel room. So I apologize for the quality or any of that kind of stuff, because it's a little cumbersome doing it on my laptop. But I'm here on official business, and that business is for my employer, Rackspace. Not only do they pay to send me all over the country and the Pacific Northwest, but they're also the sponsor of this particular Netcast. So they make the download possible. They bought me this fancy microphone, and all that kind of stuff. So if you need SharePoint services, want to host your SharePoint, look at things like that, go to rackspace.com/SharePoint and check out our offerings. Also, you can take a free, I think it's a 45-day trial of SharePoint 2013. Take it for a spin. We can give you a multi-tenant instance, so you can go in there, see what's going on, try things out, try to figure out where they hid the recycle bin this time around. So check that out. You can go to rackspace.com/SharePoint, sign up for that, and then hopefully you'll be so enamored and fall so much in love with Rackspace that you'll sign up for stuff. And then I'll get to talk to you. You'll have problems. Well, you won't have problems, but you'll have questions. You get hold of me. It'll be great. We'll bond. Be a good time. So check them out at rackspace.com. For our production notes. And again, I'm going to get my recorder up here so I can keep track of stuff. Okay. So for the production notes, I think last week's production went pretty well. I think I got everything published out pretty quickly. I don't remember there being any big problems, so that's always a good sign. So that happened. Apologize here while I adjust my camera. So that was good that everything went pretty well last week. Now I've got other good news. Hopefully there's going to be some more positive changes going on. Again, back in January, I went to the New Media Expo out in Las Vegas and caught me some great shows, but also learned a little bit, and so have improved some of my production things, got the YouTube channel. A lot of good stuff has come from that. There's some more stuff coming down the line from that too. But also, starting today, no fooling, Rackspace has hired Justin King to do some marketing for us. He's going to be marketing the Rackspace stuff. And Justin's a new media guy. He's got all kinds of crazy stuff on YouTube and all that jazz. And so one of his first tasks is going to be try to rescue this train wreck of a Netcast. So Justin and I have been talking for a few weeks now, and so he's got some ideas. I think he's already gone out and done a little bit of a spritzing up of my YouTube page. So you can go to youtube.com/ToddKlintNetcast, and I think he's playing with some branding out there. So Justin has some great ideas. Unlike me, though, Justin is actually capable of executing on them. So keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. But I got a good feeling about Justin. So good to see him on board. Hopefully there'll be some fun stuff coming from him. Yeah, and I don't have – so Justin's got a URL, and I'm not sure what it is. Justin King's a pretty common name, too. But he's got like some kind of sports site for a North Carolina team, I think. I don't know. Not big into all that stuff. But, all right, so again, since I'm on site doing some stuff, so my notes are a little short tonight, so hopefully we'll all get out here a little early tonight. The first thing I wanted to talk about was a blog post that I published last week, and this was a pretty good one. It's one I thought about a couple of other times and just hadn't written, and then a couple of my coworkers, this came up in separate instances, and so I decided to finally break down, write a blog post. It's so much work. I don't know if you guys, if you guys blog, it's a lot of work. But anyway, this was two of my coworkers who have SharePoint 2013 VMs, and we're kind of sharing these things, copying them around, and one of them noticed that his WSS logging DB was taking like 3 or 4 gig of drive space on his VM, and he's a developer, so he doesn't really care about that the brand or the logging stuff inside that database, but it was just taking up a lot of space, and his hard drive was getting full, and so he asked me if there's a way to shrink all that. So that's what this blog post is about. It's how to tame your WSS logging database on a test machine for SharePoint 2013. And this will also work for SharePoint 2010, but since I didn't have a chance to actually test it on SharePoint 2010, I didn't put that in the title. But between you and me, it'll work just fine for 2010. So first things first, if you read this blog post and you look at it, you got to promise not to do any of this stuff in production. This is a horrible idea for production for a couple of reasons. I'm going to have you do 2 terrible things that I would never suggest anybody do in production. Number 1 is to reduce the amount of data that your logging database keeps, and number 2, to shrink a database. Oof, I feel dirty just even thinking about it. So by default, the logging infrastructure inside SharePoint 2013 keeps 30 days worth of events and 30 days worth of stuff, and so that's how he got this 3 gigabyte database with just him, noodling around in there. So the first thing that I had him do is I had him go and shut those intervals down, and instead of going from 3 days, I had him go to excuse me. Instead of going from 30 days, and I'm looking at my notes now, the default is 14. That's what happens when I don't do my show prep. The default is 14 days, and so I had him shrink that down to 3 days worth of events to keep in there. And so I show how to do that in PowerShell. And in the blog post, mine is only 2 gig. I did it on one of my test machines so I could give you guys some screenshots. Mine was only 2 gig. But first, I changed the interval, the amount of data that the logging service keeps, from 14 days to 3 days. So there's just less of it. And that helped a little bit. And then I also showed the timer jobs that clean that up. Now, by default, the timer job that cleans those things up runs every 5 minutes. So if you don't do any of the PowerShell stuff afterwards, it'll sort itself out pretty quickly. But I show you how to do that, kind of to show off. I like to show off in PowerShell. And then when that runs, it goes through and it prunes out 11 days worth of events, which should be the bulk of it. And then you can go to SQL and you can shrink that logging database and its transaction database. And mine went from 2 gig to, I don't know, 300 meg, something like that. So that got me 2 gig of drive space roughly back. Now, if you do this, number 1, keep in mind it's a terrible thing to shrink databases. I'm of the opinion you should have to apply for a license before you shrink a database. There should be a vetting process, should be a waiting period, and then your county sheriff or whoever comes back and says, okay, we've allowed you to shrink 1 database, but you're gonna have adult supervision, all that. So this is why it's a bad idea in production, because you don't want to be shrinking databases and you don't want to have less information in your logging database. But for this guy, he's never going to consume this data. It's never going to do him any good because he doesn't do admin things, and it's a test environment. So for those of you that have test environments and want to keep your drive space down, this will give you a couple gig of that drive space back. So again, shorten the interval of stuff that the logging service keeps, and then shrink the database, because obviously it's gonna stay that same size if you don't do that. And then I had some comments on my blog, and I didn't have this on my notes, but so another thing that was interesting about this is I wrote this blog post last week sometime because my coworker was IMing me about it, and then sometime later, like that next day, I was going through my RSS feeds, and I noticed the week before Chris McNulty wrote the same blog post. So I didn't intend to steal Chris's blog post. I mean, we did it a little differently. It was a different use case. But Chris wrote one also. So he wrote his first. I didn't mean to steal it. Sorry about that, Chris. But another somewhat related, I had a comment in my blog about the ULS logs. So not the logging database, but the ULS logs. And somebody had one that they were getting really full, and they were so full that they couldn't open them up. They were getting, I can't remember how big they were, and he was saying, I couldn't open them up in Notepad. I couldn't get in there to see them. What's going on. And so I told him about how he should be using the ULS viewer, and also how he can cut his log interval down from 30 minutes to something like 5, and then hopefully that will give him smaller log files so that he can go in and see what's going on. I also told him to check and see if he's got something with verbose logging turned on, because that'll generate really big log files. So so that was kind of another logging based thing to talk about. Meant to put it in my notes and I forgot. So there we go. Doug in the chat room, true developer here, thinking about putting all of his databases in the simple recovery model and then deleting all the ULS logs. That will save you a lot of space, Doug. There's no denying that. I would also say, in all seriousness, for a test VM like the one that this logging database was in, I put all my databases in the simple recovery model. And for those of you that haven't played with SQL a lot, if you've ever had a transaction log or an LDF file fill up your hard drive, it's because your database was using the full recovery model and you weren't doing transaction log backups, and so it filled your database or filled your drive for you. So the thing that you can do is you can put your databases, have them use the simple recovery model, and then those transaction logs, they don't keep all the transactions, they flush them out. For a test environment, yes, that works. For production, before you do that, make sure you understand the disaster recovery implications of that. Make sure you know what you can and can't do. And Doug is also asking if anybody's done AlwaysOn with SharePoint 2013. I have. AlwaysOn is some new functionality that comes with SQL 2012, and there's actually two things with AlwaysOn. There's AlwaysOn clustering and AlwaysOn availability groups. And AlwaysOn is Microsoft's next version of high availability, so it's the next evolution of SQL clustering and mirroring. So a couple of things about that. It's incredible technology. The AlwaysOn availability groups are better than mirroring in a couple of ways. Number one, with mirroring, you had to mirror each database individually. With AlwaysOn availability groups, like the name suggests, you have groups of databases. So you can set up an availability group and then put all your SharePoint databases in it. Less configuration, less overhead, fewer threads, that kind of thing. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that the AlwaysOn availability groups will give you is the ability to have one master and up to, you can have four servers in your availability group. So mirroring was always one-to-one. The availability groups can be one to more than one, and you can have multiple types of targets. So you can have a target that's just read-only, so you can use that for backups, things like that. So good stuff. Do a bunch of research. The AlwaysOn has a hard requirement for Windows clustering, so there's a bunch of those kind of things that you got to have in place. It's not just a next finish, and you have to have multiple endpoints, and it's pretty complicated to get up and going. But so in the chat room, Derek is mentioning that Bill Bear and Brian Alderman had a good video about SQL. Yeah, last week I think it was. They had like a 4-hour block. It was SharePoint and SQL stuff, and it was pretty good stuff. They covered a lot of those kind of things. But I think the SharePoint and SQL bit with availability groups is covered pretty well online, so check that out. But definitely read through it and understand what the ramifications are, because it's tricky to set up. It took a lot the first time I did it. Also, if you want to, Microsoft has, I think on their TechNet Labs, I forget what it is, but try TechNet Labs. They have labs you can walk through, and one of them is the SQL AlwaysOn availability groups. So it's good to just walk through that in somebody else's environment to let, so you don't have to worry about setting all the infrastructure up to do this, and then it's got all the instructions. So that'll give you a good overview of the AlwaysOn capabilities. Right, so another thing that I wanted to cover tonight before Doug so rudely interrupted me with his good question about availability groups is Microsoft recently published a list of folders that you should, actually they updated it, list of folders you should exclude from your file system antivirus scanning on your SharePoint servers. And this is for every version of SharePoint from 2007 to 2010 to 2013. And it's just a list of folders that SharePoint uses in your file system to store temp files and all that kind of stuff. Things you don't want your file system level antivirus to be scanning. Number one, it's going to slow SharePoint down, and potentially, since these are these large files, you're going to get false positives on viruses, and your antivirus software is going to try to quarantine these files and just generally make a whole great big mess out of SharePoint. So if you're doing file system level antivirus scanning on your SharePoint servers from 2007 up, check that knowledge base article out. It's KB 952167. And this is good stuff to have, and it's got them all laid out, tells what the folders are. Pretty good little knowledge base article. So Doug is asking, so is this SharePoint antivirus that actually works? So this is not SharePoint antivirus. This is Windows antivirus that you happen to be running on your SharePoint server. So this would be whatever, might be the same thing you're running against your Windows 8 boxes or Windows 7 boxes. This is not the stuff that you bolt into central admin and scan files that up and down you upload or download into SharePoint. For the most part, that's kind of gone away. There's only one vendor now that makes SharePoint antivirus, and that's ESET. And Spence Harbar's got a blog post that kind of talks about that. I talked about that a couple of netcasts ago, so you can go through my blog and look for the link on that, or somebody in the chat room can bring it up. But yeah, this is the other antivirus you've got if you've got SharePoint servers. That's not complicated at all. So another thing, last week I saw this great blog post about Claims. Now Claims is pretty complicated in just how the whole process works, and as IT pros, we've been dealing with NTLM authentication for 20 years now. We've got a good understanding of that. Along comes Claims, tries to replace something that, as far as we can tell, works just fine. And so Claims has been tough to get into. Now it's getting better. SharePoint 2013 supports it a little better. So this blog post at itgroove.net, written by Keith Toomey. So the blog post explains a lot about Claims and how it works and your security providers, and it's SharePoint based, so it's all up our alley. So it goes through that whole process, and that's good. There are a bunch of blog posts that explain all that. Keith does a good job of it. Read through it, it's all good. But the thing that really jumped out at me that I wanted to bring to your guys' attention is we've seen these claims-based identities, these claims-based tokens show up in SharePoint. And they are the things that look like I:0 hash, splat, bang, click, hieroglyph. There's this big long thing. And it seems to make no sense whatsoever what that thing is. I mean, we look at it and we're like, oh my God, it's a claim. But this seemingly random string of characters that makes up the claim doesn't make up much sense. So the thing that I really like about Keith's blog post is, like, halfway down, he's got that token, and then he breaks down what every character actually means. So you can look at that claims token as it shows up in your welcome thing or whatever, and understand what every character means. So we'll go through it just kind of quickly. You don't need to remember all this. Go to Keith's blog and read it there. But all of your user claims will start with I:, and that's because they are an identity. You might see some that are C:, and those are roles. So they're like AD groups would be. And if you've ever set up like FBA in SharePoint 2010 and 2013, when you set up your role providers and all that, you've seen reference to that C: in there. But if it starts with an I, that's an individual. That's an identity. If it's a C, it's a group. So the 0 means nothing. The 0 is just reserved. Someday something else will go there, but right now it's 0 and it doesn't mean anything. The pound sign is how it's encoded. So it can be a pound sign, it can be a question mark, all that. And then the W is the provider type. So W means Windows, but it could be M for membership, T for trusted, S for local, that kind of stuff. So now you can go through and he gives some examples of some of them, but that whole string of CRUD has always been kind of confusing, and I like how Keith broke that down. So if you're going to be moving towards Claims, read that blog post. It's a good blog post. Even if you're using Claims, it's a good refresher to see how that works out. So good blog post on that Keith. Perry in the chat room asks, Todd, would you be able to talk about OAuth a little or introduce a good technical reference which goes through OAuth? So I don't have any handy in my my machine. I'm looking at my task manager in the corner, and it's about 2 CPU clicks away from bursting into flames, so I can't go out and look for something quick. But I will look that up. That's a good topic for a future discussion, a little bit about OAuth. OAuth is interesting because OAuth is not just users now. Now apps can have authentication, so OAuth gets kind of complicated. But that's a good suggestion, Perry. If you think about it, shoot me an email. I know you and I have emailed back and forth, so remind me of that, and I'll try to add that to a future show. Maybe Keith has a blog post on it on his website. I'll have to look. So this is a fun one. So friend of mine, friend of the Netcast. Let's see if he's in here. He's not in here tonight. Jason Himmelstein shot me an email last week. He was having some weird problems with Explorer View, and he kind of was looking to bounce some ideas off of me, and it ended up turning into a blog post. That's good. This is the kind of stuff that I see. I like to see is when people come across problems like this, when they figure it out, sharing the answer with the rest of the community. That's really helpful because everybody has these kind of problems, and Jason broke it down pretty well. So basically what Jason found out was, or the problem that Jason had was he had an environment, and some users could use Explorer View and some users couldn't. And it seems that problem followed OS lines. So like users with Windows 7 could and Vista couldn't or something. He explains it all in his blog post. And so I couldn't give him the full answer. I was kind of busy that day with doing some other stuff, so I didn't have a chance to give him the whole thing. But basically what the difference in his issue was is there are multiple ways for your client to talk to SharePoint to give you that Explorer view. And that the different ways determined by what OS level you're at, major version or minor version. So for instance, I think it's Vista RTM does it different than Vista SP1 even. So your OS version comes into play, the version of SharePoint comes into play, and whether or not you have Office comes into play, and then what version of Office you have. They all kind of work together to make this Explorer view thing happen, and there are combinations that you can get that make things not work. And so sometimes Explorer View comes over WebDAV, sometimes it comes over front page RPC. And if you've ever gone and done Explorer View, normally you get the nice 3D icons when you do it. But if you ever do Explorer View and you get the flat, like 16-bit icons in SharePoint, that means you're using front page. And so what he found was he was having some problems with his managed paths, and on his thing lays it out. But the thing to keep in mind is if you're ever having problems like Explorer View, something like that, try it on a box that has a different OS, a different version of Office. Try it from a server, things like that, and try to figure out what the commonality is, and that'll give you some help figuring out how to troubleshoot it. And if you remember, here a couple of months ago, we had a similar problem where people could check out documents from Firefox, but not from IE. If Office was installed. Same kind of thing. It's that communication between the client OS and the server. So if you've got weird problems like that, it's worth your time to try it on another environment, different version of Windows, different version of your Internet Explorer or browser, something like that. And it's sad, but in some cases it's good to test that stuff from a server, like on either your SharePoint server or just another server, because normally those things are going to be very stripped down. They're not going to have Office installed. They're not going to have a bunch of browser plugins installed, and that'll kind of give you an idea of what's going on. Another great thing to do if you're troubleshooting this is use Fiddler, because Fiddler is going to show you the traffic and it's going to show you the difference, so you can look at one that works and one that doesn't work and try to figure out what the difference is. And also any networking tools, like Wireshark or whatever. Look at the ones that work, the ones that don't work, see the protocol differences, that kind of stuff. So thanks to Jason for writing that out, because that's going to help other people down the line. And thanks for giving me a thanks, even though I didn't do anything other than tell him I couldn't help him. Didn't know the answer. I kind of gave him the overview of the protocol thing, and then said, I don't know why yours is broken, but here, go look at this. Go figure it out. See what you can do. And so Explorer View is another thing, and Joanne brings it up. Explorer View is one of those things that a lot of people forget, and I think it was Lori Gowan in the chat room here who was telling me earlier this week she was talking to somebody, and they were trying to figure out a way to mass move files from one SharePoint farm to another SharePoint farm, files that were in document libraries. And so they were coming up with ideas like, downloading them all and then uploading them and things like that. And they'd completely forgotten about Explorer View. And so you can just open up, your document library in Explorer View on your source, open up your destination document library in Explorer View, lasso, drag them over, and it takes it all over. Now you do miss some things like versions and workflows won't fire and that kind of stuff. But if it's just basic documents, it's way better than downloading and uploading where you're going to miss that stuff anyway. So Explorer View is one of those things I just think people forget about. It's kind of crazy. The other thing I was talking to somebody about the other day was they were talking about, I can't remember what it was, one of these file sync things, SkyDrive or Dropbox or something. And they were saying, yeah, well, we can map this to a drive loader. You can't do that with SharePoint. And I said, sure you can. You've been able to do that since SharePoint 2003. Again, it's the whole WebDAV thing. It's the Explorer View thing. You can map a drive to a SharePoint folder if you want to. Not a great idea necessarily, but you can do it. It's there. But it's just one of those things that people get so used to using the web interface that they forget about some of these handy little tools, little functionality that SharePoint has for us in the background. All right. How are we doing on time here? Better than I thought. So Mark Crispin in the chat room says, it would be so nice to be able to move content between site collections without losing version history and metadata and without having to purchase a tool. But yeah, so there are some options for that, moving them between farms. And I guess the thing for Lori's issue, I think, and again, I might be misremembering this, is they didn't have access to the back end. They didn't have access to the SharePoint servers and all that. But yeah, on the front end, you're looking at third-party tools, things like that. All right, so that is the end of the topic session. So now the shameless self-promotion part of tonight's Netcast, everybody's favorite, my favorite, your favorite, and I got a lot today. So the first one is 1 week from now, 1 week from right now, I will be in Sydney, Australia. Bruce in the chat room is in Sydney. I think Perry's in Sydney. So I'm going to be down there seeing those folks. Now, here's the plan. You guys know that like a year ago, I kind of made a New Year's resolution and said that I'm going to try to be super vigilant about doing this Netcast, whether I'm traveling or not. Tonight's a great example. All my coworkers are at some fancy steakhouse down the street eating like kings, and I'm here because I just got to keep doing it. So my goal next week is to do this Netcast from Australia, same time, all that jazz. Here's the potential rub. I will be in Australia at this time. So right now in Sydney it's 11:30, well 12 o'clock Tuesday morning. The problem is I get into Sydney at like 6 o'clock Tuesday morning after having been traveling for 26 hours. So while I will be in Sydney, I may be physically incapable of getting there and then doing a Netcast like 5 or 6 hours later. And they tell me it's actually 1 p.m. In Sydney. So my heart and my soul will be into doing this Netcast. I've even talked to people in Sydney. I think Mark Rhodes and I are going to try to do it. Probably do it from my hotel room or the conference or whatever. Again, my heart and soul are into it. I'm planning for it. I'm lining people up. My body may not cooperate, or it might be one of those things where, you guys have all seen it. You get really tired. You get punchy. It's kind of like you've been drinking a little bit. We may end up being one of those. The other thing that will be bad is Perry and Bruce and those guys always have to put up with horrible latency and dropouts and all that kind of stuff when they're watching it live, and they're saints for putting up with it. But now it's going to be all you guys that are going to have to put up with that. And for Perry and Bruce, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be life changing because there's going to be no lag. It's going to be great. So that's the other thing. The live thing may not go off very well. But again, my intention is to absolutely take everything I need and do that Netcast Tuesday morning. But I may end up being weak. So watch out on Twitter, and we'll see. It may end up being that I set everything up and I stick my my password on a stick it, and Mark Rhodes does it. I don't know. We'll see. But I'm going to try to do it, so stay up for there. But then after all that Wednesday, I'm going to be doing some sessions in Sydney. I got 3 sessions. Last week I had 2, but I cried, and Mark gave me a 3rd one. So I'm going to be doing a session on setting up the Office web apps and configuring those for SharePoint 2013. I'm going to be doing another session on setting up the store, the app store inside of SharePoint, how to configure all that and get that all connected so you can add local apps and get the apps that are out in the Microsoft Store. And then I'll be doing my SQL Reluctant DBA session also. So I got 3 sessions. Also, for those of you that are going to be at the conference, Rackspace has bought 25 of my SharePoint 2010 books because the 2013 books aren't out yet. But I'll be giving away 25 signed copies of my 2010 book. So if you're going to be at the conference, be at the session. If you want a book, the best way to get a book is to introduce yourself to me. Let me know who you are, because I'll have some leverage over who's going to who's going to get those books. So come up and say, hey, if you're a Netcast watcher, let me know, and I'll see about getting you a signed copy of the book. Again, it's 2010, so you probably already know everything that's in there, but it's great for holding windows open. You can throw it at dingoes if they try to steal your baby. You can swing it menacingly at kangaroos, that kind of stuff. So you got that going for you. But I'll be down there for that thing. Cannot wait to go down there. I've been wanting to get down to Australia for a lot of years. Finally going to happen. 1 week from now, 168 hours from now. Only half of that I will be spending on an airplane. I'll be down there. Increasing my international footprint. On April 16th, so that is 2 weeks from Wednesday-ish, I will be remotely, not on site, remotely presenting for the Slovenian SharePoint user group. You can check those guys out at slospug.si. And so the guy that runs that, I think his name is pronounced Robbie. I apologize if I mispronounced that. Met him at TechEd Europe last year, and he and I have been trying to get this thing working for a while, and I've just not been real responsive, but he asked, and I finally agreed. So I'm doing that April 16th. I know that I'm going to be doing it over GoToMeeting. I don't know if they've got any kind of live streaming thing. You probably have to be in Slovenia to watch that. So to all my Slovenian viewers out there, I'm going to be doing that. So check that out. I'm also going to be doing the SQL session for those guys too. Doug in the chat room, and remember, Doug's a developer. He's kind of touched. He's asking if Slovenia is in Australia. Yes, Doug, Slovenia is in Australia. No, it's not. So I'll be doing that for them. And I've been to Slovenia. I was there last fall on vacation. Stopped in Koper and had a great time. Love Slovenia, so I'm excited to talk to those guys. A week after that, I'm doing another remote session. Penton, the people that make the Windows IT Pro magazine and SharePoint Pro Mag, all those guys, they're doing an online upgrade session with doing some online webinar stuff. I'm going to be doing a SharePoint 2013 upgrade session. I don't have the URL for that. When I was making my notes for tonight, I was trying to find the URL, and I don't think they've ever sent it to me. So I don't know how you sign up for it. I'll find out from those guys and get the URL and put it in the show notes. But that's going to be for Penton. And so Eric in the chat room is asking, what's a magazine? Is that what 8-tracks are made out of? It's funny. They actually don't print the magazines anymore. It's all online. So every month they send you an email, and it's got a link to a PDF file, and you download the PDF file. So it's crazy. But yeah, they don't actually print the magazine anymore. And I've been talking to those guys. On and off, I write for those guys, and I want to do something a little more regular. So hopefully you'll be seeing more things from Penton from me. Well, I can't believe this is just now coming up. SharePoint 2013 or Professional SharePoint 2013 Administration should be coming out like in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I think. I think the last date I saw was April 23rd here in the States. Very excited about that. My part is done. They're no longer waiting for me. I'm no longer the weak link in this whole chain. Everything's on them. So I'm very excited to get that out there. You can, so if you go to toddklindt.com/pro-sp2013 that will take you to, right now that'll take you to the Amazon page for it. I need to blog all that. But you can pre-order it now from Amazon, so they will overnight it to you and ship it to you. Also, I'm going to set up, I need to put the blog post in about all this, but I will also be selling signed copies of the book. The good news about the signed copies is that they will probably take longer for you to get, but they will have something horribly mean but honest written in them about Shane, probably. So I'll sign it. So if you want a signed copy of the book, you can order. You'll be able to order them from me. Also need to figure out if I can sell the ebook copies. We got to figure that whole thing out. But pre-order it on Amazon or hook one up from me, and we'll get you hooked up. Finally, as my tour of the world continues, I will be in New Orleans the first week of June for TechEd North America, and I'll be doing a SharePoint admin session, and then Shane and I will be doing a pre-conference session on SharePoint administration. So check that out. I think Rackspace will have a booth. I'll be hanging out, so definitely come by and say hey. And again, if we've got any books to give away, the 2013 book will be out by then. So I don't know if we'll be giving them away or doing whatever, but so we'll have that. And then at the end of June, I will be in Madrid, Spain for TechEd Europe, doing the same sessions, but without my ball and chain. Shane will not be there, so it'll just be me. You won't have to worry about him interrupting me. It's just all goodness, and that'll be in Madrid, Spain at the last week of June. You can go to europe.msteched.com to find out about that. And that is it, folks. That is all the self-promotion that I can talk about. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you putting up with the hotel hijinks and all that kind of stuff. Next week, hopefully, I'll see you from Australia. That's the plan, but we'll see. If not, keep an eye out on Twitter. I'll let you guys know there. So thanks, everybody. Have a good night, and hopefully, I will see you next week for the first Australian SharePoint Netcast from me. So anyway, everybody, thanks and have a good night.